What if you could help others to find the power to heal themselves, physically, emotionally, and spiritually?
When I started teaching my classes, it was in 2002, and I was just doing past life regressions and contacting the subconscious part. But then as the time went on and we found how powerful this was and what we could do with it, a lot of the students began saying, you know, advanced past life regression doesn't really tell what it's all about. This is so much more than that. We think you should change the name. So it was a few years ago, we decided to change the name to Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique.
Help other people to speak to their higher selves. You can. Dolores Cannon has taught thousands of people from across the world how to use QHHT. Now you can learn her method by going directly to themoreshow.com/QHHT. And don't forget to mention the discount coupon MORETALKS. Andy, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Great to be here.
Thank you very much. Now, Andy, just tell us a bit about yourself to begin with.
My background, as you say, is in science. I did a degree at the University of Lancaster, studied chemistry, and attained a first class back in about '89 or so, during which time I spent a year as a scholarship student in the University of California, and went back out there to do another year as a graduate student in organic chemistry. So I've got a long history of scientific study. While I was out there in California, I found California quite a sort of life-changing experience, as a lot of people do when they're out there. And I read very, very widely at an absolutely fantastic university at San Diego. It was very strange. I think it was used out of the Mission Impossible, the library there. It was a very weird shaped building. Yeah. And it had an eclectic library, which I explored thoroughly. So that was the point where I sort of became very interested in a lot of side issues of science and areas that science had yet to sort of deeply explore.
Yeah, so this was a bit of an eye-opener for you. So were they New Age books, were they? Or what were these books?
Not particularly. I was very interested in philosophy, and I was very interested in things like Chinese philosophy and so on. I did pick up books that were what you'd call, you would not necessarily call New Age, but was alternative, left field.
Right, yeah.
And I found it a way of trying to open my mind to other ideas. That I found the higher you went up in science, the more that your perception of the world became a tunnel vision a little bit. And you were very, very much more narrowed in and focused in on a very small area which you've become specialized in.
Right.
And I think I was counteracting that by opening out into other areas. And this is where some of these ideas come from.
Because we've got some of your books here, obviously. And I want to start with the Planet X. Now, how did that work come about?
When I was younger, back in the 70s, we used to watch Cosmos on television with Carl Sagan. I used to love that program, and it was I was very, very much wrapped up in astronomy. I really, really enjoyed it, but I didn't want to go on to study it. Yeah. I wasn't going to become sort of the new Brian May, if you like. So chemistry, I had a real passion for it. I really loved it, but I had very much an interest in this as well. So I was sort of exploring both things, exploring astronomy on a sort of amateur level, not in a telescope sort of way, but with a wide reading. And as I was saying, because I was exploring other ideas as well, everything that came along within sort of the alternative scene that was astronomy related, my critical analysis of it would sort of come into being, and I'd start looking through it. Are they right here? Are they right there? And I still do that now. I read people's books and take them to bits in a sort of scientific type of way. And I came across the writings of a man called Zecharia Sitchin, which were to do more or less with sort of ancient gods being real and being people that were living on this planet long ago. But he entertained the possibility that they come from a planet in the outer solar system. So at that point, my brain starts to go into overdrive, and I look at that and think, well, is that possible? He hasn't got any scientific credentials that I know about. Is this just sort of an idea?
So where did his information come from? Where did his source come from of information that this was the case?
Well, he had a very, very keen interest in what would be called Oriental studies. I don't know if they're still called Oriental studies, but effectively they weren't Far East, but they were from the Levant, the areas of the Middle East, ancient times. So he was particularly interested in the Sumerians, who were the first race of civilized people around about 6,000 years ago in what's now modern-day Iraq. And he would look at their writings and would throw his own interpretation on them, I think is probably the best way of putting it. Instead of seeing their mythology in terms of it being, myth, he would look at it and say, actually, if you read this literally, there's a story here.
What is he reading? Tablets, or what is he decoding?
Yes, the tablets were written, they were clay tablets, and there were libraries full of them, and they were written in cuneiform script, which is just little wedge-shaped marks. Okay. And they were translated, I don't know, maybe 150 years ago or so. Right. And he claimed to have the ability to sort of directly translate this. Now, this is something that Sumerologists argue, well, there's only about 300 people in the world who can do that, so they're not sure he could. But not necessarily important whether he could or whether he couldn't, because you can actually pick up the translations today.
So what do these translations say? They said that an ancient race from this planet, Planet X as you call it, came to our planet and did what?
Well, what they said was the Anunnaki, they called them, which were sort of, some people call them demons, but they were actually the gods and goddesses of the pantheon of this first civilization. They said they from heaven to earth came. They came down to the earth from the sky, and they came and they genetically molded. They didn't use those words, but essentially that appears to be what happened. They created the Adam. They created mankind from the
right. So you're saying that text from those stones actually talked about genetic modification.
Yes. Well, this is his interpretation of it. He says you can either look at it in terms of a sort of a more biblical rendition, which is God, created man, or you can read what they were saying, which was that they came down, they needed slaves, they took these sort of very basic creatures and they turned them into thinking people to work for them.
Okay. So do you talk about that in this first book then?
The Dark Star, the Planet X evidence is an analysis of his work to do with his astronomy, which is his idea of Planet X, which is this very distant planet. And what I propose through it, which has become really synonymous with his ideas now, it's been taken up by his fans somewhat, is that the way that would work is that the Anunnaki are from a mini solar system within our own solar system, which is flung far beyond Pluto.
Okay, so where is this then? We're talking about a mini moon, are we? Or
no, we're talking about a planet that is neither a planet nor a star, but is what's called a brown dwarf. A sort of fiery entity about the same size as Jupiter, which is not shedding out an awful lot of visible light, but is kind of a sort of a furnace up there. And it creates the environment on a moon around it, which is habitable, but is dark enough to have so far evaded our detection.
That's what I was going to say. Why has mainstream astronomy not sort of detected this small body?
It's possible that they have. And I don't mean that in a conspiracy idea.
No? Okay.
The thing is, this thing is moving around the sun so slowly that it could well have been catalogued as a background star. Because it's close but very dim, it could be interpreted when seen as exactly the same as a much brighter star that's a lot further away.
So is there any sort of text to say it's going to appear again, or are we due to see this star at all?
This is a very controversial matter. The name for this entity, this celestial entity, is Nibiru. Which is, I think, the original name from Sumerian, or possibly Babylonian, because the Babylonians talked about it as well. And they described it as a red star that appeared in the sky for a temporary period of time and was something of a phenomenon when it appeared. And at that time, you would have the gods come to Earth, because presumably it was appearing at a point where it was quite close to us.
So when you say gods come to Earth, were they gods in the sense of, they had superior technology compared to us, so they would have been seen as a god?
Not necessarily. It certainly was at the time, but they may not have had fundamentally better technology that we have now. If we, say, in 100 years' time, were able to colonize Mars and we sent rocket ships over there to colonize it, and we discovered a little race of people running around who, I mean, it's obviously not going to happen because Mars is a dead world, but as an analogy, you discovered over there people who hadn't attained civilization. From their viewpoint, we would appear as gods.
Yes.
And this is the idea
I think it
turned
was
around.
Arthur C. Clarke that coined that phrase, and I cannot remember what it was, but something about, if you're the superior technology coming to a sort of not so superior race, then obviously, you will be coined as some sort of god, and
yes.
And perhaps that's what your work shows. But where does, if this is right, what you're saying, then what's it mean for us then to know this?
It means a number of things on a number of different levels. I think the most basic is that we're not necessarily just, well, like the Bible says, we're fashioned in the face of God. And I'm not a religious man at all, I have to say, but the implication of that idea being correct, if it is correct, is that we're half ape, half God. And that at some point, maybe a couple of 100,000 years ago, maybe earlier, we were taken from a humanoid existence, and genes were put into us, which created intelligence, empathy,
but why would they do that? Why would they, modify
to make
us
us very useful
for
working for them?
Right. So
we
were
create
a slave race.
Exactly. Essentially,
what sort of work would that? But
Zecharia Sitchin talked about it in terms of, and this is where it gets a little bit funky.
Yeah.
He talked about it in terms of us being taken from the savannah and being put down mines to work and do mining, because the Anunnaki came here and for whatever reason they came here to do mining. Now he says they did it for gold. I think there may have been things like uranium or other precious resources that they were looking for, which would be a reason why you would go to another world to gain resources. Yeah,
which is what a lot of the films say. Take a lot of the big movies out there, and that they do say the same thing, don't they?
And they were saying that the colony that was here was relatively small, and they were obviously having to work quite hard to do mining. And they looked at these humanoids running around, and they thought, well, actually, we can do something with these guys if we just muck about with them a little bit. And things kind of got out of hand.
So God is an alien then? Is that what we're saying?
This is what Sitchin's saying. Now, personally, I look at this whole thing and I think this is a possibility.
Yeah.
I'm not...
It's your interpretation of his interpretation of said events.
But I'm not saying this in terms of this creating some kind of religious idea.
No.
From my point of view, I'm interested in this from a scientific viewpoint,
of course,
which is that this is a totally different hypothesis, and it may appear to be completely wild and wacky, but it's a hypothesis that could be proven or disproven. And if it's correct, it has incredible implications for all of us. So my interest in this is to try and work out, A, if there is a potentially habitable planet out there and how that would work, and B, where is it? And if we can find it, and potentially we're on the threshold of that right now, then that's a world-changing idea that would be proven, that would change everyone's perspective. So this is my interest in it. I'm not coming to you to sit down and say people should believe that the gods came down. It may not be the case, but if it is, it's a very exciting possibility.
Absolutely, it is, absolutely. Well, we're just going to take a break there. So stay tuned. We're going to take a break now, and we'll continue to talk more with Andy about his research.
You're on a journey right now, a destination where you are headed full of adventure. And all around you are clues pointing you in the direction of your higher purpose and dreams. The signs and synchronicities can be seen. Whilst on a trip, at your local coffee shop, within your social networks. The road to your success and happiness is scattered throughout the pictures of our days. Simply make the connection, that's all. Channeling.com is your source for highly regarded spiritual readers who can direct you on your journey. Use the code TMS1 to receive a discount on your first reading.
Welcome back. For those who have just joined, I'm here with Andy Lloyd discussing Planet X and 2012. So Andy, welcome back.
Thank you.
So yeah, we've just been discussing Planet X there. So what's the scientific sort of, reasoning behind your work? Is there a sort of scientific connection?
Yes. When I got interested in this subject, I wanted to try and find out whether there'd be scientific credibility to the idea. And that set me off on a sort of journey of exploration through the sort of scientific press on the subject of the outer solar system. And what became apparent quite quickly was that there are actually a number of astronomers and astrophysicists who are interested in the same question. And although they don't particularly want to be associated with Zecharia Sitchin, in fact, they go quite a long way out of their way not to be, they are actually coming up with very similar ideas. The reason being is that the outer solar system is not terribly well understood, and there's an awful lot of anomalies out there which at the moment defy explanation. Things like Kuiper belt objects moving in strange orbits, planets not quite doing what they should be doing, the Kuiper belt being cut off, and comets coming into the solar system in very strange ways. These have presented questions as to the fact that there appears to have been some interference with the outer solar system, and astronomers need to answer that question. And it's become particularly pertinent in recent years. Some of them have started to say, we think it's because there's a very, very major planet out there.
Right. And is this planet affecting us now and the sort of outer solar system?
Yes.
How? I mean,
well, potentially, if you have a binary system where you have a very small star and a very, very large star, they're not separate entities just swirling around each other. They're interacting in some way. And there's a number of field effects that could be happening, as well as gravitational effects. And also in terms of the energies of the orbits of all of the planets could be affected by one that's out there that's adding something into the mix. So the solar system, everything is sort of intermixed in a way. So if you have something quite big out there that's added into it, then there's nothing to say that we're all not affected by it in some strange way. So this is a very important consideration for scientists. And surprisingly, there are a number of scientists who quietly think that this is a very real possibility, but are very, very careful about how they present it. They don't stand up in front of the press and talk about it, but what they do is they put a paragraph or two in the end of a scientific paper, quietly suggesting it.
Well, that's what I was going to say to you as well. I mean, has your work been received well by the scientific community in general?
I think they read what I write about. I think they think about it. They like the idea that somebody's out there putting these ideas, but they have to be very, very careful not to be appearing to be cranks, because they have their own academic side that needs to be protected. Yeah. But they, at the same time, enjoy new ideas and new novel ideas. And this particular idea is something that I think, strangely, a lot of astronomers find more likely than the general member of the public who might come to it for the first time and say, oh, no, they'd have found that.
Yeah, because that's right. You write some of these books as science fiction novels. That's right. So you're mixing mainstream facts in with non-mainstream. So has that made it easier for you to sort of write these books as well?
Yes. I went off into writing novels a little bit for the last few years because I wanted to put what are sometimes quite complicated ideas into a format that would be more accessible and a bit more exciting and interesting for people. Because this can be quite dry.
Yeah, so it's an interesting way you've gone about it. You've not just said, right, this is fact, but you've mixed it in with science fiction, which have you been approached by movie companies at all to sort of...
Once or twice.
Yeah.
Again, the subject itself needs a little bit of explaining, as you probably discovered in us interacting about this. But the potential for life existing within the solar system and being intelligent life is a very, very exciting one. Yeah. Before the Voyager spacecraft went past Mars and started photographing it and seeing that it was a fairly barren world, and the Viking and Mariner visited there, people were quite excited about the possibility of there being Martians. Yeah. People were excited a long time ago about Venusians rather than Venetians. There are, of course, Venetians. Yeah. But astronomy had something of a setback in the 70s because we realized that most of the rest of the solar system appears to be dead. And the romanticism of the whole thing went out. Now, I think this idea returns some of that because it says that there could yet be something out there that's so big that it is potentially able to sustain life.
Well, there's projects out there right now looking for life. I mean, what about the Wiseman telescope? Is that right?
Yes, the WISE is an infrared sky survey, which is very, very a huge project scanning the sky. And it's picking up any object that's irradiating heat. So it's been able to pick up a lot of small solar system objects like asteroids and comets. And one of its specific remits is to find brown dwarfs that are close to the solar system. Now, it's still being worked upon, and in order to find what I'm talking about, they've got to see it twice. They've got to see it once in the sky, and then they've got to see it having moved a little bit a year or two later, in order to be able to see that it's actually moving around the sun. Because otherwise, it could just be, as I was saying before, it could just be another star out in the background. So we're waiting for that science to be completed, and it may be about 2013 before it is.
So where's this time with some of your work into 2012?
Yes, well, a lot of people are interested in the idea of Planet X being some kind of catastrophic body that will come into the solar system and either strike the Earth or bring with it a hail of comets that will destroy us. And because 2012, which is connected with the Mayan calendar, and one of the points where the Mayan calendar stops during its major cycles, people are concerned that these two things are connected and that the Planet X catastrophe is just around the corner. So there are a number of people, particularly out on the internet, who scan news stories and scan any discovery of comets and so on. There's one called Elenin at the moment, which is caused a lot of concern because the first three initials are ELE, which is Ellie, and there was a film called, I think, Cosmic Impact a few years ago, where the comet that was to strike the Earth was code-labeled Ellie, which is the extreme sort of, I can't remember what it's called, but effectively life's going to be destroyed in the world. So people are concerned that it's been called Elenin because it's something to do with Planet X. So I don't advocate this.
No.
I tend to think that this body is a very, very long way away. But as I was saying before, even if it's not approaching us, because it's connected with the sun, even from a distance, it could be affecting what the sun is doing.
Again, you said this before, this magnetic sort of interference or a sort of attraction of stars and stuff.
There are a number of fields around the solar system. And one of them ends in a sheath called the heliosheath, the heliopause. And it's been found that that's got quite a big dent in it. And there is a possibility that the body that I'm talking about is creating a sort of dent in the solar system's field, which in some ways affects the sun. We know this because the Voyager, the Pioneer spacecraft that have been sent, or possibly the Voyager, one or the other, where they should have crossed through one part of it and another part of it in a very sort of predictable way. It's turned out that this thing is really unpredictable and is sort of pushed in on one side. So that is another thing that might indicate that there's a large Planet X body.
Right, okay. And do you think some of these planetary changes that we've been going through now, for example, the earthquakes, the tsunamis in Japan, is that connected with this sort of Planet X appearing?
I'm not sure that it could be directly connected, but it may be connected in some way with the sun. Last year, there were very few sunspots, and the sun seems to become very dormant, and it seems to be picking up again. And I think that meteorologists particularly underestimate the impact of the sun on our climate and on our world. And we live in a very fragile planet, and our crust is very, very small, and we're riding on a mantle of molten rock, really. And I don't think it takes an awful lot to create a lot of disturbance on this world. No. So I think people underestimate the effect of the planets around us and the sun on not only our climate, but potentially the fragility of our planet as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And but then you come up. We spoke about the sort of skeptics a little bit. Is there quite a bit of skepticism towards your 2012 work, or has people been quite open with what you've had to say about it?
I think scientific skepticism is a very healthy thing, and I find myself applying that same skepticism to people within my group who do similar research, because I think in the same way that science has to be peer reviewed and people need to look at each other's ideas analytically and be critical, we need to do that with each other.
Absolutely.
So I welcome skepticism, not knee-jerk skepticism, not where people just say, oh, that's rubbish and be dismissive, but people who actually look at the ideas, examine them, and see if there's any possible reality to them. And it would be true to say that I think if you ask most astronomers, is there a Planet X, most of them would probably say no. but I would say that there are also a group of them who are very well educated and highly regarded academicians who would say, actually, I think it's a distinct possibility. And I think that's your answer.
Yeah.
There is skepticism, but there is also a realization that it's a possibility. And until WISE has completed its survey, and until we really understand the solar system entirely, I don't think anyone can say for sure that there's not one.
So for people wanting to look into more about Planet X, as well as buying the books, do you have a website where people can sort of get in contact with yourself? And
Yes, I've been running a website for about 12 years called the Dark Star Theory.
Yeah.
And it's got a huge amount of information, not just scientific, but also esoteric, mythological. Yeah. I go into an awful lot of areas because this is a multifaceted area of research.
Yes, of course.
And to just look at it from one angle is not to give the subject the attention that it requires.
Yeah.
Because obviously, if you're looking at the work of Zecharia Sitchin, one needs to understand ancient history. One needs to look into the possibilities of how genetics could be manipulated and so on, as well as the astronomy side. It's a vast field.
Just very briefly, really briefly here. If these, telescopes are up there looking out for these anomalies, these dwarf stars, how do we know what they're sending back is the truth? I mean, how do we know we're seeing what's really NASA's seeing?
I don't think you can be sure of anything. I mean, for instance, if you wanted to go down that line, you could argue that the images of the Martian surface were looked at before we ever saw them by a company called Malin out in San Diego, and they were pretty much coming through a filter before they came into the public domain. One could look at that and say, well, that looks a bit suspicious. The latest survey of the moon's surface was conducted by a probe called Clementine, which was run by the Department of Defense.
Yeah.
One has to be very careful in looking at scientific research and saying where it's sourced, who's looking at it, who gets to look at it before you get to look at it. All of this, again, requires skepticism. It works both ways. So, yes, it is quite possible if we knew, in the same way in that film, if we knew that a comet was coming our way, they might want to stop people knowing about it.
Absolutely. Well, Andy, thank you so much for joining us today.